Welcome back to the Poet Speaks podcast, #1 spoken word poetry podcast in the world. Now, our next guest is a writer naturalist whose recent books are Toward Antarctica, Once Removed, and the anthologies Cascadia Field Guide, Art, Ecology, Poetry. Winner of the 2024 Pacific Northwest Book Award and Broadsided Press, 15 Years of Poetic Artistic Collaboration, co-created with Alexandra Teague and Miller Oberman. Her poems have appeared in the New Yorker, Atlantic Monthly, Poetry, The Sun, and her honors include the Audre Lorde Prize in Lesbian Poetry and Stegner Fellowship. She works as a naturalist and field assistant at home on Cape Cod, teaches creative writing at Brandeis University, and is editor-in-chief of Broadsided. Everyone, give a warm welcome to the Poet Speaks podcast, Elizabeth Bradfield. Elizabeth, how are you?
I'm great. I'm super happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you for creating this platform and for inviting me.
Absolutely. We're thankful for guests like you that are doing and have done so many big things and amazing things, and kind of poking your brain and finding out the person behind the poet. So we're so grateful to have you on the show today. So first and foremost, we ask everyone, where are you at currently in the world right now? Tell us your location, country, state. Where are you out in the world right now?
I'm in the attic. No, I'm in the attic where my office is, at home on Cape Cod in Truro on the Outer Cape, traditional homelands of and present homelands of the Wampanoag people. It's a beautiful spot, adjacent to National Seashore. It's a salty, sandy place with a lot of boats and science and art and queers, and it's a pretty great spot.
Awesome, awesome. Cape Cod, cold? I'm just assuming cold. I've never been. Is it always cold? Do you get good sun there? Right now, we're
Oh,
cold.
it's we had a pretty awful storm the last couple of days. Western Mass got hit way harder than us, but right now, early April, it's about average in the 40s, damp and chilly, but man, in the summer, warm and soft air and good swimming. Yeah.
Nice, nice. I was just having a conversation with a friend how now I moved back to New York. It's like the seasonal depression. It's so real. I don't know. I don't know about you, but it's just like I just want the sun to be out. I'm over it. I'm over
Yeah.
this. I'm over this cold, dreary, gray looking weather, honestly. But Cape Cod, beautiful place, beautiful place. Now tell us a little bit about your childhood. Where did you grow up? Did you grow up in the United States, in that area, Cape Cod? And tell us about your childhood and how writing intersected with your childhood. Did it find you in childhood, or did you find it in childhood? Or was writing and poetry something you found much later in life?
Yeah, I grew up, talk about seasonal affective disorder. I grew up in Tacoma, Washington, in the gray zone.
Ah,
And I never thought of it like that. I loved it. It's a beautiful place. I mean, I grew up in the burbs. I grew up in the kind of drive everywhere, sidewalkless burbs of Tacoma. But on Commencement Bay and really the water and saltwater islands, shorelines shaped me, and I feel super, super lucky for that. And how did poetry find me? I was always a reader. I was either poking around on a beach or with my nose in a book. Those are the two places you could find me as a kid. Whether it's like, turning over rocks and finding crabs to stick down my sister's shirt, or hiding out somewhere with a book. And we had nursery rhymes, as a kid, Mother Goose and all that, but poetry, not so much. It wasn't really something in our house. But okay, here's the embarrassing thing. I think I first was like, ooh, poetry when I was in elementary school, first or second grade or something like that. And, one of the assignments is write a haiku. And I think I got like a gold star. And I was like, ooh, gold stars, poetry. People like this stuff. And, little people pleaser me was off and running. But honestly, it really became something important in my life in high school, when I struggled a lot in high school. It was not a happy time for me. I was gay and didn't know it. It was a pretty conservative space. I was a mess. And poetry was a place where it was safe to feel a lot of things. It wasn't appropriate to feel a lot of things elsewhere.
Yeah.
But all the feelings could happen in the poems. And so that's when it really became central to me.
Yeah, that you hit on such a great point. I mean that yeah, high school is so tough. I was, when you watch like kind of I was gonna say you watch like films and movies, they try to amplify that the best time of your life. It's such a tough time, not only you're physically changing, but it's that mental emotional, which leads to the blueprint for the rest of your adulthood in a
Oh,
way,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. And add
Yeah,
on to that any kind of personal traumatic stuff that
yeah.
happens. And it's rough. Like you're kind of grown up, but you're kind of not. And I mean, I guess I know people who loved high school, but that was not me, you know?
Yeah. And it's one of those things you're either blessed or cursed with good parents and family at that age, that really change the trajectory of where your life can and cannot go. But I love the fact that you said you found yourself through writing. You can have feelings in writing, right? That you otherwise could not really express in your day-to-day life, especially as a high schooler, as a teenager, right? Tell us a little bit about, I'm so curious then, it's kind of becomes this thing of what did you find yourself writing about? Someone like you, I'm so intrigued because you go into such, I find your work is very so complex and deep. It's very complex and there's many intricacies to it with themes of just isolation, the environment. That's a whole stratosphere, right? When
Yes.
you were that young, I mean, when you kind of began that process of poetry and writing, what were you writing about at that time? Were you already in this kind of mindset that you're in now with these very complex themes that your writing is about?
I thankfully I've forgotten a lot of what I wrote in high school because I think it was probably pretty bad. But I do have this vivid memory of I don't know why it sticks with me, but this is you're going to be like, okay, whatever. But it was a poem. There was a really vivid image in my mind of um, this yellow anchor line floating in the water and being tethered to that and adrift on a boat. Of course, it's always about boats, but um, it's nothing profound, but that image is still really vivid to me. And I mean, I wrote about my feelings. I wrote about things I found beautiful. I wrote about, I was very inspired by Sylvia Plath and
Mhm.
the confessional poets of the time. I think my writing changed a lot in my late 20s, early 30s, and then I moved from I'd been living on Cape Cod and I moved to Alaska and um, my partner and I moved to Alaska and it changed my work because there was so much homophobia there. It was so intense. And it's better now. I'm not going to diss Alaska because I have great friends there. They're an amazing writing community. It's a place that is a home of my heart that I adore. But it politicized my writing and made me write into and find intersections between the things I found beautiful and interesting in the more than human world, and also the things that I found interesting, disturbing in the human social world, and interweaving those began for me when I was living in Alaska.
No, that is very fascinating. I'm this kind of idea of moving to a place like Alaska, it politicizes your writing. I want to hit in on that. That's really fascinating to me. In what ways was it the environment of Alaska that would push your creativity to become more like, as you described, politicized? And what does that necessarily mean for you? My writing became more politicized living in a place like that. Because so many
Yeah.
people here, Alaska, I think they just cold. They have no probably most people I think don't have too much of a conception of Alaska community, neighborhood, a
Yeah.
house, living there.
Yeah. Well, first off, it's a big state. I don't know if you've seen those maps where if you take Alaska and put it on
Yeah,
top of
yeah,
the lower 48, right?
yeah,
The contiguous US, it's pretty much as big as, right? So both is the environment is incredibly varied from Southeast Alaska's temperate rainforest to the drier, more extreme interior around Fairbanks, where it's very cold in the winter and hot in the summer, to even further north up toward the North Slope, where you have, you're truly above the Arctic Circle and have 24 hours of dimness, if not total darkness.
Yeah.
So it's, it's big, and there are bigger cities and there are tiny communities, very small villages where people are living on their ancestral lands. That was, the indigenous history of Alaska is so different than elsewhere in the United States.
Yeah.
And that was really fascinating to learn about. I was living in Anchorage, so the biggest city. And I was again in the burbs in a townhouse condo, but adjacent to this city park that then backed into wilderness that went for hundreds of miles. And by wilderness, I don't mean there's no human presence. I guess I mean there's no built communities. There's no, power lines and that kind of connection. And so day to day, it's like anywhere. I mean, extreme seasons can be very cold in the winter, but summers I was wearing shorts and flip-flops, The daylight is different. Those long, long summer days where it doesn't in Anchorage get dark till, 10 at night and it starts getting light at 3 in the morning. That's a lot of fun. You can start a hike pretty late in the day. But I think, again, my partner's a biologist, and I work as a naturalist, as you said in the bio, which means that I work as a natural history interpreter. So I'll go out with people on hikes or on boats and provide background, scientific background, ecological background, cultural background on the place and the beings that we encounter, whether it's humpback whales or bears or skunk cabbage, whatever. And I love that work. And I was getting more into it when I lived in Alaska. I think there were just different opportunities that were presenting themselves. So my mind was turning a little bit more from, wow, this is awesome, to what's the science behind this? So I was reading more into the science. I was reading more scientific papers. I was engaging that way more holistically, and kind of had been doing it before, but it kind of reached a critical momentum. You know how you start doing something and then it takes a while for everything to really click in, and then you're like, oh, okay, now I see what's happening here. So that was happening. And at the same time, my partner is a pretty obviously butch lesbian, and she got a lot of grief in our neighborhood on the streets. There were just only a couple scary, violent moments, violence avoided, but, violent adjacent moments. And I had moved from a place that was so accepting and where queerness was so the norm that I knew about homophobia, and I'd lived other places that were different, but something about being there, it came into my writing. I was like, I have to write about this. And so I started writing these praise songs to butch lesbians who don't have enough praise songs. There are not enough poems in praise of the butches out there. And so I really wanted to fill that silence. And I wanted to write about bears and ecology, and I wanted all of those things to be together, and I didn't see why they couldn't. And at the time, I was being advised to keep those things in their separate little corners where they belong, right? The nature stuff and the queer stuff. And I was like, no, I don't think so. I see the nature through the queer eye. I see the queer through the science eye. They belong together. So that's a long answer. Does that answer your question?
No, absolutely. No, thank you for sharing that. That I'm sure very much, it sounds like very pivotal in your life journey experience, living there and having your art then be kind of a reflection of what's happening with you as well as your partner. So thank you so much for sharing that. Absolutely. Now you kind of mentioned that a little bit, again, seeing these intersections and, hey, look, we need to combine them, the nature, the identity, all these things, they're not separate entities. They're all everything everywhere all at once, right? I'm so curious. Tell us a bit more about that kind of connection to the environment that your poetry and your writing takes place in. I really am intrigued by this idea of how you kind of compress the two and kind of see it. I think that a lot of us, I'm a nature person. I love the environment, but in the same breath, I think I'm I don't know, I'm always intrigued by people that are so in tune with it because it's one of those things, life is just so the society we live in doesn't allow you to, if that makes any sense. Like I'm always worried about the next money in the bank account, paying bill, you know what I mean, paying bills, job, da,
Yeah.
la, la. The environment, I think, for me has become so last on my list. And even when I think more of the social environment than even the physical environment, which
Yeah.
they're all the same, but I don't even conceptualize it. So tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about how you conceptualize the environment as a naturalist into your writing.
Yeah. I'm lucky in that I get to help out as a field biologist, a field assistant on some projects. So I get to help out with research on whales and seals in particular. And I'm around biologists a lot. A lot of my friend circle are biologists. And so it's always what we're talking about. You know what I mean? So it's in the ether um and as a writer, what really interests me is how our social selves influence how we perceive, understand, engage with the world outside of our dwellings, right? Outside of these structures we live in. Um, how does the fact that I'm a middle-aged queer white lady influence the way I see a pine tree or a dandelion busting up through a crack in the sidewalk? It does influence it. And I am really fascinated as a writer with the moments where that social self comes into high relief in the way that we see the more than human world. And it comes into play in so many ways, right? The way that I would describe a white shark is influenced by the life that I've lived, right? The memories that are vivid to me, the experiences that I've had, my own weird personal fascinations
Well,
with whatever macrame um, uh, or opera, whatever. And so that social self dramatizing how one particular social self can see and honor and do the homework to really understand and know as best I can what it is to be a white shark or what it is to be a black-capped chickadee, to bring that ecological knowledge and also honor the viewer. And the only viewer I know super well is me. So dramatizing that, I hope, is interesting. And it's interesting to me. And I hope it's also interesting um, and maybe an invitation to other people, because I want to know how you see a white shark or a black-capped chickadee, you know?
absolutely. No, absolutely. That's such a fascinating kind of take on that. Yeah, how do you even interpret, like you said, a pine cone or a redwood tree, and
Yeah,
how all our our identity interpret that? Now I want to talk about specifically one of your great works, Towards Antarctica.
sure.
I think when I think of poetry, like now doing this show, being able to travel as a poet, as an artist, I've seen poetry in all places, Japan, countries in Africa, Southeast Asia, right? Antarctica is such a question mark. Antarctica is such an unknown. I'm just so fascinated kind of the ethos of how that book or how that piece for you came together. Now it's the description bit, you use photographs, compressed prose, short poems to examine our relationship with remoteness, discovery, expertise, and labor. I mean, how in a place like Antarctica, you of course you do think remote, right? You do think of examining the relationship with solitude. Tell us a bit again, how did that piece come together? How did that work come to be? And where was the inspiration of Towards Antarctica? Where did that all come from?
Sure. Um, you know, I've worked for the past 20 years as a guide on expedition trips, ecotourism,
Wow.
smaller boats, not the 5,000 person monsters, but usually 60, 100 people on a
Mhm.
boat, passengers, not including the crew. Um, and I have been obsessed with Antarctica for decades, since the mid 90s. I got really into reading explorers accounts like Shackleton and Scott and these famous guys from the golden age of exploration in the early 1900s. Um, and I read about them and read about them and was, I don't know, I think I was at the time I was working for a .com startup. I was at a desk a lot of the time, and I so wanted to get away from the desk. And I think reading about that felt like as far as I could get away from my keyboard. Um, and I didn't think to start writing about it until about 10 years in, honestly. And the poems I was writing became my second book, Approaching Ice, that looks at the lives of these historic figures, that questions these ideas of purity and remoteness that they would express in their own writings, which purity, remote, sure, but there's a lot of social stuff in there and biases and prejudices in a lot of the language we use to talk about exploring. Just it's the legacy of colonialism, even in Antarctica, which does not have a human indigenous population. Um, and okay, so I wrote Approaching Ice. It was wonderful, but I had never been to Antarctica at that point. And finally, after that book came out in 20, the book came out in 2010, and I got an invitation to go work on a ship in Antarctica as a guide in 2011-12. That was my first season, and I was so excited. I was just out of my skin with excitement, to be able to go to this place that I had read so much about, to experience penguins and leopard seals and the iconic beings of that place, not to mention the ice, the rugged rock formations, even the seas, even the notorious Drake Passage, the bumpy crossing from South America to the Antarctic Peninsula. I was so excited. Um, and I knew it would be kind of a ground truthing, a way to see not only what it feels like, but what I got wrong in my imagination, And I think as I was there, I started writing in this haibun form, this old form invented by Matsuo Basho to chronicle in the 1700s his foot journeys through remote Japan, which combines, prose, haiku, and in his case, paintings, sumie paintings of temples and mountains and flowers. And the idea of that as a form to chronicle a journey was really interesting to me. And I was really interested in kind of poking a hole in that idea of remoteness and isolation because, yeah, I was remote. We all were, but I was not in isolation. You know what I mean? I was on a ship with 200 other people, and pretty much everyone who goes to Antarctica is not there alone. There are very, very few people who are there alone. It's in some ways, it's an even more tightly knit community because the larger resources of the built world, hospitals, et cetera, are further away. So you are on each other, you know what I mean? And I was interested in showing that side of things, in trying to capture also I love books like Kitchen Confidential and these behind the scenes in various industries kind of books, looks at the backside of various professions. And so Toward Antarctica is a little bit of that too. I mean, I am, as a guide on these trips, I'm the expert, right? I'm one of a team, 15 or so of us. I'm an expert. I drive the boats around. I give, illustrated lectures. I offer information, kind of like a safety guard too. So I have this position of power, but it's also the service industry, you know? I
Yeah.
mean, we are there by the grace of the people who pay money and want to be shown this place. And so it's this weird position that's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And I was interested in de-romanticizing some of that work as well.
Mm. Okay, wow. I mean, I'm just listening to you talk and I'm just like internally salivating because I think that's just such a beautiful thing to be able to kind of, I mean, like it's just to find that, we as writers being able to just venture to these new places. Like you said, you were inspired by like Bourdain, or no, what's the Kitchen Confidential is written by who again? Or
I can't remember, to be honest.
it's one of those chefs, but I know exactly what you're talking about. And it's just taking us unwrapping that kind of wrapper. And I don't know, my mind is blown, just Antarctica and just this idea of, even like you said, it's solitude there, but you're not really solitude because you make that great point. In a place like that, you would have to have community because
Yeah,
you would literally have access to not that much. So
yeah,
it's really almost like an oxymoron. It's probably the most community-based place in the world. And it's this idea too of like you said, there's no human indigenous people there. So but there's, I'm assuming, animal indigenous life
beings.
beings, plant life that's indigenous that's also there. No, that is beyond fascinating. And to really take your poetry, take your writing there and expand it, really, I mean, when you do something like that, I mean, like, your mind just must expand so much. It must be such a blow up of just creative palette and taste. I mean, that is, like you, I'm also intrigued in Antarctica because it's just this idea of remote. It's just again a question mark. It's like Alaska.
Yeah.
You never hear about people going there. People usually don't per se vacation there. From what I've read, Antarctica, it's apparently they've only had the first woman go there. What was it, like in the 1970s or something?
I think it was earlier than that. There were a couple of earlier women, but yes, women's presence on the continent is quite recent.
I mean, that it's just so fascinating. So again, a big round of applause to you. I'm in awe of just what you've been able to do with that piece of writing and just the inspiration and be able to create that and then kind of the follow up with that. No, I'm
It's so,
speechless almost just because
it's
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 just
so funny because like this is a reflection of how our social worlds are siloed, right? Because like if I go on my social media feeds, it's like everyone's going to Antarctica. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I go on mine. No, I've met one person that he's been to Antarctica, and now
Yeah.
now two. I mean, no, that is just beyond fascinating. Tell me about the reception of that piece of work, though, toward Antarctica. I mean, what has the kind of rippling effect been? Obviously, you've been, prestige and awards have definitely came from that. But tell me about the rippling effect of the community-based people that you meet face to face, in terms of that writing.
I think I was really nervous
Oh wow,
for my shipmates to read this book
wow.
because there are people who have spent so much more time in Antarctica than I have. I mean, I think about my friend Kara, who I was just emailing with this morning. I mean, she's been working there for 25 years, and she knows it so well. And I'm a newcomer compared to a lot of people. And I know it in a very particular way. And I really, I'm writing about an experience in terms of working as an expedition team on a ship I'm writing about an experience that isn't portrayed very often. And I really, really, really didn't want my shipmates, my crew, my team to
Mm,
feel like I did them a disservice. So I was super more nervous than any other book of poems because it felt like I was speaking for a community in a different way, or I was one of the few people from this community that I knew to speak about this kind of work. And that's a big responsibility. Um, but people, I mean, the people who didn't like it haven't talked to me, so that's great. And I'm sure they're out there. But I presented and spoke at there's an annual meeting of the IATO conference, the International Antarctic Tour Operators conference. And I went and shared and spoke, and I was so nervous. I was sweating bullets for exactly that reason. But it was a lovely experience. So I feel relieved and grateful that what I wrote about felt true to some of my community.
absolutely, absolutely. No, that's amazing. Again, a big congratulations on that amazing book. And I'm sure the legacy that it'll leave. I mean, like I'm sure more people, like you said, in your sphere, people obviously know about Antarctica, but as you know, a lot of people don't, and a lot of people still that connection between our writing, our and identity and the environment is so important. So big congrats to you, and thank you for making such amazing work. Now, as we're kind of wrapping up here, I kind of want to end all be all. I think you're such an amazing person to ask this to. You had mentioned with Towards Antarctica, it was 10 years. You were working like at a .com job, and you had always wanted to go there. But it was like like you said, a 10-year period before you got to writing, correct, that book.
The book before, actually, it was 10 years before I wrote the researched book, Approaching Ice, that was about the historic explorers. Yes.
There we go. Yeah. Tell us a little bit. I mean, what is your advice? I think so many people listen to this show, and the comment I always get is just ask people, ask writers, how do you begin? How do you reach that, whatever success may look like? Tell us a little bit about what would your advice be to anyone that's starting out? I mean, like you said, you were in a job, you just were like, I'm here. Like I want to do other things. And how did you kind of find yourself into writing? What was that? Was it patience? I mean, what was it, that long road? What is your
Yeah.
advice to those folks that are just like, I love this, I want to do it, I want to get up and write about these things.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to begin. What's your advice?
Yeah. I mean, first, I think there's no wrong path, right? However you do it is the way you do it. And I mean, I can share what my path was, and maybe that'll have some inspiration, but I know, there are a million and one ways to figure out your relationship to writing in your life. I'm not even going to say a path, right? Because that implies some kind of linear trajectory, and it's maybe a stipple or a random wandering. But I tend to be an episodic writer. Like I'll be all in and just going, going, going. And then, I'll step away, life, work gets busy, but there's something happening in the back of my brain. And then I'm called back to the page. And trusting that was really important for me, and figuring out how to have paid work that would support my writing mind. And the .com was not doing it. It was too much time at the computer for me. So I quit that job and started working as a kayak guide, and that helped me. And then I figured out, I need physical work in the world in order to feed my writing. I need field work. I need something using my body in order to be drawn to the desk. And so that dynamic for me was really important. And when I wanted to come back to writing, I graduated from college, living the messy life. And then I was like, I need to get back, and I want to recenter writing in my life. And I did a couple of things. First I set up daily writing practice. And at that point, what I did was I gave myself 1 word per month. So say April, the word of the month was ice. May, the word of the month is moon. And then every day of that month, I would have to write a poem using that word. It doesn't have to be the center. And I wrote a lot of really bad poems, but it got me writing every day. And it just gave a little bit of structure. And it was, even working a full-time job, I could find the time to write 1 poem in a day. And the more, for me, the more I wrote, the more I wanted to write and the more I wanted to work and do. Then I wanted to go back to graduate school and dedicate myself that way. And then I wanted to work on a literary journal. And that taught me so much. Like, for folks out there who are looking for community, working for a literary journal, volunteering to read submissions and to talk about submissions and talk about poetry, it's an amazing education into what's out there, what you like, what you don't, it's an immersion. And you have your editor pals to chat with and laugh with, and it's a beautiful community. So, I think that's my weird path, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I think it makes complete sense. And like you began that by saying there is no path, right? It's there's a lot of directions to go to get to the same destination, right? To get to that same dream and goal. So yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing some of that wisdom and some of your experience. I know it helps a lot of people just to hear people say it. Sometimes just being able to profess it and say it. So really appreciate that. All right, now, Elizabeth, we've had such great conversations so far, and I really do appreciate you sharing a piece of your brilliant mind with us. Now, my last question for you before we wrap up, Elizabeth, tell me, why do you need to get your words out?
Well, out of my body onto the page, because it helps me understand the nuances in my reactions to things. Like when I'm out there and I read an article, say, for example, this happened, I was working on this poem this week about the Haddle Zone, which is this deep, deep, deep zone in the ocean, down in the oceanic trenches. And for some reason, I kept thinking about it, and I knew there's something there. There's some reason that it's tweaking at me, right? That I can't let it go. And so the act of writing the poem is an act of figuring out what other associations are making something resonant. And they help me figure out how I understand the world and how things connect for me. In terms of moving poems out into the world in a public way, I feel so lucky when I can connect with people and hopefully inspire them to honor their creative impulses. It's been a gift to receive emails sometimes from folks saying that a poem was helpful to them. That's amazing that somehow I was able to express something that helped them see their own lives or help them understand something in their own lives. So that is a true joy of the public side of writing. But I think, the two sides, the why do you write and why do you publish, are different, and I'm happy that they're different.
Absolutely. All right. Elizabeth Bradfield, everyone. All right. Well, thank you so much for being a guest today. Now, before we finally do wrap up, please do tell us what 2024 and beyond is looking like for you and your writing and your work, and tell us where the folks can come find all of your amazing work, any social media websites that folks can check out.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I have my writerly website, ebradfield.com. And I think the social media links are there. I'm only on Instagram and Facebook. And then I would love to be able to share with folks Broadsided, the magazine that I run, this unbound, unconventional literary magazine where writers send us work and visual artists respond, and we publish these collaborations. So check that out at broadsidedpress.org. And this next year, I'm just trying to finish up this new book of poems that hopefully I'll turn in to the publisher at the end of the summer. It's a book of poems that explores the ocean, listening across time and distance, the queer body in her 50s, and what that looks like, and working on another literary field guide like the Cascadia Field Guide, but for this bioregion, for the region from Cape Cod up and around to Nova Scotia. So honoring the beings of this region with art, ecological and social, cultural descriptions, and poetry. So that.
Absolutely. All right, well, that sounds like all amazing work. Everyone listening, Elizabeth's links will be down in the description/detail box, no matter where, what platform you're listening to this amazing podcast at. All right, Elizabeth, thank you so much for being a guest on the Poet Speaks podcast today.
Amanda, you're amazing. Thank you for all that you do.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Again, check out all of Elizabeth's amazing work, and everyone check out the Poet Speaks podcast, no matter where you listen to your podcast. All right, bye-bye, everyone.